Today I wanted to come to you guys as someone who's had a journey, I'd say, of about 6 years of being officially diagnosed with OCD. I have been feeling pretty inspired to share content outside of just books. If you guys look in my channel, I have some book reviews, and I wanted to kind of do like a side piece on mental health, spirituality, fitness, just health in general, just well-being, right? Maybe even sexuality. I'm not sure about that just yet. But yeah, I love listening to other people's content and journeys. That is what kind of keeps me going. So I wanted to kind of put in my contribution to this as well. Disclaimer, guys, I am not a licensed therapist. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. If you feel that you're going through a mental health crisis, please consult a professional. I also want to add that for specialized cases such as OCD, it's a very niche case. It just doesn't fall under like depression or anxiety, even though those could be like comorbidities. I think that's the word. Please see someone who is experienced and trained in treating this condition, and they're not just like a regular GP or even a regular therapist, in my opinion. This being said, I do want to share accurate as well as subjective or experiential information about OCD. I think it's very important as well to share one's personal experience when it comes to this, and not just a point of view of a professional, because they're not the ones who are really going through it, even though they might have a lot of information and testimonials from the people who are suffering from such a condition. They don't really have firsthand experience. Let's start with what is OCD and what is pure O. This is taken from the National Institute of Mental Health website. Obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, is a common, chronic, and long-lasting disorder in which a person has uncontrollable, recurring thoughts or obsessions and or behaviors, which are called compulsions, that they feel the urge to repeat over and over. These recurring thoughts can be about fear of germs or contamination. They can be about unwanted, forbidden, or taboo thoughts that include sex, religion, or harm. Aggressive thoughts towards others or self, or most of what I had, and having things symmetrical or in a perfect order. So the unwanted, forbidden, or taboo thoughts, as well as the aggressive thoughts towards others or self, kind of fall under the pure OCD category. This is not to be confused, and a lot of people who do actually have the condition want to make this very clear, that this is not to be confused with the notion of being perfectionistic or detail-oriented, etc., as how some people describe themselves. I understand that this is done by people who do not really have much knowledge of the condition, and it's really hard to explain to someone. I remember when I was going through it, people would be like, "Oh, I bet your home is really clean," and things like that. Or, you just love things to be in a certain order. And yeah, some people with OCD do have those inclinations. Not everyone with OCD have that, but it's confused with the other condition, which is called OCPD. It's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So that's more of like, when someone is very perfectionistic, needs to have things done in a certain way, etc., or else they get anxiety. Someone might say that they don't like it when their shoes are misaligned, or they have to just fix something that seems off to them, and that makes them OCD, and that is not really OCD. OCD is when intrusive thoughts that you don't want to bother you keep coming back even after correcting the situation, And it can be extremely distressing, to the point where it's like you just can't stop yourself from doing that action. Thoughts are usually followed by a certain type of repetitive behavior in order to alleviate the distress that comes from these thoughts. For example, they could be checking behaviors. That's more of quintessential OCD that you see. Where you do hand washing, you check, whether the doors are locked. And then there's pure OCD, and this term is used mainly to differentiate between mental compulsions and physical compulsions. I don't know why I said that. I'm going to go into a little bit about the variations of pure OCD that I personally experienced. This is so crazy. This is a thing that I feel really weird even talking about it, because the difference between psychosis and having irrational or bizarre thoughts and having OCD is that you are aware of the knowledge that these thoughts are ridiculous, they're pure garbage, but your mind keeps telling you these scenarios and these stories of certain things happening. And it's just insane. Unless someone's had this, there's no way to really explain it. You just can't switch gears from one thing to another. That thoughts just keeps looping in your head. So it all started, I'm getting anxious just even talking about it, but the thoughts that I had initially were aggressive thoughts towards oneself or others, and that's specifically called harm OCD. Mental health hypochondria. At one point thought that I was schizophrenic and bipolar, and constantly checking on symptoms and trying to convince myself that I am not under these labels. And mind you, I am not throwing any biases towards the people who actually go through these problems, who actually have these conditions. And there was also some scrupulosity around numbers and symbols that I would see. Yeah, when I say aggressive thoughts towards oneself or others, that's how it all started. Basically, I was taking medication for my depression and anxiety, and I was given this really high dose of this medication, and it was by a GP. There wasn't really an intake or anything like that. It was very weird, and that's why I'm always advocating for people who are going through something like this to really see a specialist, because a general practitioner is just gonna give you medication and just tell you to try it. Let them know that you want to be referred to a specialist. When I was taking that medication, I believe after 2 or 3 years, I decided to go off of it, which is a bad idea, guys. Don't go off your meds without consulting your doctor or your psychiatrist. Horrible idea. And then I was fine for about a year or so, I thought. And then one day, I was chasing my ex-husband around the house with a stick in my hand, and this thought, just this crippling thought took over me, where I was like, I can just use a stick to beat the shit out of him, and it scared me so much to even think that. And that awareness just stuck around. I couldn't get rid of it. I remember I was doing a lot of yoga and a lot of meditation around it, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And then it kind of pivoted into this thought of me just flinging myself in front of oncoming traffic. And it's not that I want to do all of these things. I really did not want to do any of these things, but the fact that my brain kept on bringing up these scenarios terrified the shit out of me. And so, this would happen with if I was to work with knives. I had a pet rabbit, and I would have these horrible thoughts about the rabbit. I just felt like I was going insane. But that started happening around the numbers 666. Those numbers were, whenever I saw them, I would get really, really afraid. etc. So yeah, the best way to describe how it feels to someone who may not understand it is, suppose like you're in front of like a cliff or something, and then your brain just goes like, oh, what if I just like throw myself out of a cliff? And then you get to loop back and be like, whoa, that was a really weird thought. Anyway, I'm gonna go walk around thing, like I'm just gonna go on with my life. But that never happens in someone with OCD. They just find meaning from it. You keep ruminating over it, that, you know, you're a bad person. What if I'm suicidal? What if I'm homicidal? I'm a threat to society, etc. So yeah, you can get misdiagnosed with other conditions when it comes to pure O. And that's what happened to me initially, getting these thoughts. And I took myself to the emergency, and I was admitted to like their mental health ward, and I was just so scared. I was terrified. I wasn't doing any, fear was in my head. Yeah, the difference is that, you know, the person who has OCD is aware that they are having irrational thoughts. They don't want to have these thoughts, but you can't not have them in your head. So yeah, you can have depression from the utter torture of being bombarded by these thoughts all day in your head and not be able to actually be fully present in your life. I remember, you know, going out with friends and just anxiety taking over my body. I would try to listen to podcasts. That's like one of my favorite things to do, and I couldn't do that anymore. I would try to really distract myself by watching happy stuff. I stopped watching anything that had violence in it or anything that was scary. And I was praying more. It wasn't bad. And it does take a lot of mental energy to try to compartmentalize this in your head and all of its complexity. So let's get to the good part, guys. Treatment. Treatment usually includes specialized therapy as well as medication. And I wouldn't say as well as, I'd say and or medication, because for some people they can be able to manage OCD just with medication or just with therapy. So I will list what helped me, with the first point being the most helpful. Number one for me was getting back on medication. It was a different kind of medication. It wasn't the same. I'm currently taking fluoxetine, and it has been working just right with me. It has not completely eradicated the intrusive thoughts, but I'm very happy to say that I consider myself in remission. And it did take a while. So for me, I believe it took about, I would say 6 or 7 months to get fully adjusted to the medication and start feeling stable. It was really hard for me because I did not want to get back on medication. I was consuming a lot of content where people were saying that going on medication means that you're weak. It really messes with your brain chemistry. You can just work it out, or you could do alternative therapies. And I did do a lot of alternative therapies, which did not work for me. I did Reiki and all these other, I would do like 1 hour meditations every day. It didn't do shit, okay? The second thing that really, really helped me is this book called Brain Lock by Jeffrey M. Schwartz, and I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. This guy, Mr. Schwartz, is a godsend, seriously. I still have the book, and I'll still sometimes read it because I've noticed that when I'm PMSing, my intrusive thoughts come back a little bit. He tries to equip you with the knowledge that this is just a brain malfunction and you are not your thoughts. So whenever these thoughts come in, you acknowledge that these are intrusive thoughts, and then you label them as thoughts that are sticking around. I might not be accurate enough. You label them as intrusive thoughts that are happening due to a chemical imbalance in your brain. And then you go back. You just go back, regardless of whether these thoughts are still staying or going away or whatever. You go back to doing whatever you value in your life. So if you're working, just do the best you can. Just keep working. If you're eating, just keep eating. If you're tending to your kids, just do that, you know? And it really, really, really helped. There's also an audiobook version of it, which is really good in his voice. And he's very convincing. And I always feel safe listening to his voice. I was really drinking in all the content from the specific channel called the OCD Stories, and this was when I was in the thick of it. The OCD Stories is a channel on YouTube, and I believe it is by this person who does have OCD themselves, and they're getting trained, or I believe by now they're probably already trained, and they just give a lot of hope for people who are in the thick of it, and they feel like, you know, they're never going to come out of it, because there is that extreme hopelessness that you feel. And I'm going to link that in the show notes as well. And then ERP was very beneficial. ERP stands for Exposure and Response Prevention Therapy. This is specialized for people with OCD. It helped tremendously, and understanding the logic behind it was amazing. So what you basically do is you expose yourself to the triggers rather than running away from them or avoiding them. You expose yourself to them until your brain, at first, of course, you feel anxiety, and then your brain just gets bored of that subject, and then the recurring or intrusive thoughts stop. They don't stop, but they slow down. So, for example, for me, I had thoughts of not being a good person, basically, you know, because I thought I was a threat to society, I was a threat to myself, I was a horrible person, you know, it was kind of crazy. And so my exposure therapy included me watching a lot of crime documentaries, which I actually ended up really loving. I love true crime because I love the whole thing of being able to solve a case, not because of the pain. Yeah, like watching a lot of true crime, reading books that had the topic of suicide in it. So I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, a bunch of other books that was written by Virginia Woolf. I also watched that Netflix show where the girl, she gets bullied in school and stuff. I forgot the name. I think, you know, she like tapes herself. I forgot what it's called, but it was very triggering. And I did notice that, yeah, you do get some reprieve from those loops in your head that keep telling you that what you're experiencing is really, really excruciating. And this is not to discourage people, but exposure and response prevention therapy was really hard for me to access, and it was really, really expensive. I was seeing someone for an hour a week for exposure and response prevention therapy, and it was back then, mind you guys, this was back in like 2016, it was $300 a session, and there was no insurance, and it was really difficult. It was very disappointing for me because a 26-year-old back then, I definitely did not make that much money to be able to afford that. And then once I came to Vegas, I did try to find a therapist who could do the same, but I believe I found one therapist who said that they did it, but once I started talking to her, she really had no idea what she was doing. So yeah, like you really have to make sure that the person is specialized in your specific condition. It's so important. ACT is also known as acceptance and commitment therapy. This is also what I had a little bit of difficulty finding with therapists here in Vegas as well. So I didn't do this in sessions, but I ended up getting a book from recommendations from the OCD Stories channel. And the book is Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life by Stephen C. Hayes. It was phenomenal. Highly, highly recommended. So yeah, guys, for those of you who are going through an extremely difficult time right now, who feel like this is not gonna end, just know that I feel for you. I have been there. At one point, I remember I couldn't leave the house, and yet I had to work, and it was a really dark time in my life. And I do have a few recommendations when it comes to when you start realizing that this is what you have. Do not go for just any regular CBT or just any regular therapist. They might end up making it. I remember I went to a therapist and I was crying a lot because I just couldn't, like, it was just unbearable, the thoughts. At one point it was so bad I would force myself to sleep because that's the only time that I got relief from these thoughts. The therapist was like, do you want me to call the ambulance because are you in risk of like harming yourself? And that made it even worse. It was bad. So go to someone who actually specializes in OCD. Please guys, do not take quote unquote advice from family members or friends who have not had this issue. They might tell you, yeah, I have OCD too, or yeah, I have these things, and don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about unless they have been officially diagnosed with the condition itself. Even then, take it with a grain of salt because there's a huge spectrum when it comes to OCD, and the subject matter can be very different from person to person. And in my case, researching on my own helped the most. I freaking saved my own ass, and I'm very, very proud of this. At one point, I did have people tell me not to go back on medication. You're so strong, you've already gone so far, you've done a year without medication, maybe you should start working out a lot. And I did, and I was kind of ripped at one point, but my OCD was still there. You can be ripped as heck and still be mentally not okay. Yeah, you still have that part of you, that intuition that's telling you this is the right thing to do. And if medication is it, go for it. Try to let go of the stigma of medication. Seriously. At this point in my life, I am completely okay with the fact that I will have to be on medication for the rest of my life. I've had it for 6 years and it's wonderful. I'm fucking grateful. Okay? So yeah, I hope I did a thorough enough job of explaining this condition. I understand that different people have completely different experiences of the same thing, so I would appreciate your input on it. Please comment down below, reach out to me, tell me how you guys are doing. I can try my best to refer you towards like specialists or different, resources that have helped me personally. Other than that, I love you. I want to give you guys a big hug. If you are going through the same thing, hang in there, guys. Yeah, just hang in there. I'll come back with something new. Bye-bye.